Archaeology porn.
Alright, so for today's edition of Archaeology Porn, I am going to show you the sun and the moon. We're going to have a look into one of the most scintillating treasures of the Bronze Age, because that's where we still are in the three-age system. And it also happens to be one of the most, or according to some, the most important archaeological find yet of the 21st century, and that would be the Nebra Sky Disc. Around 3,600 years old, it's the oldest object ever found to realistically display astronomical phenomena. It's the holy grail of archaeoastronomy.
You have chosen wisely.
Now, this long and twisted tale involves villainy, trafficking, and a messy court case.
There'll be crooks and cops, there'll be villainy, but with us on call, we'll fix it all real easily.
So buckle up, we're off to Nebra, in Germany's state of Saxony-Anhalt. The year is 1999, and two guys are illegally metal detecting, treasure hunting, in an area known to have prehistoric settlements and burials. And pretty soon, their metal detector starts making those weird noises.
You know, the bleeps, the sweeps, and the creeps.
And so they hurry up digging, and one of their spades hits something, damaging it. And pretty soon, they've uncovered a hoard, which includes two bronze swords in such good shape they could have been forged yesterday, two axe heads, a chisel, and two armbands, and also this strange disc. And so they take the loot and they hurry off into the night. It's a couple years later, and the hoard has already changed hands several times in the shady underworld of crooked antiquities dealers. Don't think this stuff is too cloak and dagger, though. The Met and other major institutions like it buy from these sorts of shady outfits all the time, or at least it seems that way from the headlines. Anyway, back to the story. So by this point, the rumors have made the rounds that something has been changing hands that could rewrite history. And by February 2002, the authorities are hot on the trail, and they trace the stolen loot to Basel, Switzerland, where a couple of antiquities dealers are about to make a sale. It turns out the buyer is a state archaeologist, Harold Miller, and this is a sting operation. So the transaction is made, the cops bust in, and the perpetrators are brought to justice.
Lieutenant Frank Driven, Police Squad, this is my Captain Ed Hawken.
Is this some kind of bust?
Well, it's very impressive, yes, but we need to ask you a few questions.
And when the archaeologists realize what they have on their hands, it makes world headlines. And what did they have on their hands? Well, of course the archaeologists had an inkling, especially from the styling of the swords, but without the evidence from the dig site, they really couldn't say. Especially that strange disc, it was unparalleled. Nothing before had ever been seen like it. So they traced back the disc through its tangled web of transactions, and they caught the original looters. Who decided to cooperate in exchange for leniency, and they brought the team of archaeologists and the investigators back to the original dig site where they had recovered the goods, and the real archaeological investigation began. Now, of course, the actual spot, which had been dug now at this point several years before, was pretty much ruined. However, the whole area was within a prehistoric enclosure like this one, which often contained burials, but in this case there was no body.
Where is it?
What, the body?
The phone. What body?
But there's no body. Nobody. There's nobody in the study. No.
However, traces of soil on the disc and other objects matched the site, And in turn, some of the in-situ soil had traces of metal that matched the alloys in the finds, like the disc. Based on the style of the swords and the physical evidence found at the site, archaeologists dated the hoard to 1800 to 1600 BC, way back in the early Bronze Age. But this is where it gets weird.
It got weird, didn't it?
Yeah.
First, some archaeologists express skepticism as to the authenticity of the goods, considering that they had spent so long so close to the surface and were in this good shape. And to confuse matters even more, the two dealers who had already been convicted at this point were appealing that conviction, arguing that they weren't guilty of trafficking in antiquities because the objects were actually fakes. Now, that was a pretty bizarre claim, considering the dealers had long boasted of the hoard's authenticity. So essentially what they were saying was they were not guilty of antiquities trafficking because they were defrauding their customers.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
And at this point, the defendants called Regensburg University archaeologist Peter Scheuer as an expert witness. Now, he had never seen the disc in person, but he claimed that just by looking at photos, he could tell that the patina on the bronze, that green patina, was not authentic and was actually the creation of a modern mixture of acid and urine. The trial went on forever because in Germany, defendants have the right to challenge every single factual point that the prosecution makes. And of course, the prosecution was vigorously contesting all of Scheuer's assertions, using backup from other archaeologists. But after years of litigation, not only were the original convictions upheld, but the sentences were actually lengthened. And although the whole situation got pretty ugly, well, not that ugly, but the media and the public were left confused, and the whole thing was a real embarrassment for archaeology. However, as we know, challenges can make you stronger when you rise to them, and that's just what happened here with the discipline of archaeology.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Stand a little taller.
As a team of committed archaeologists undertook a years-long process to basically use every sort of method of scientific testing to authenticate the hoard and to back up the dating. First of all, they'd already corroborated the claims of the now repentant looters by associating the soil clinging to the objects with that at the original find site. And second, they radiocarbon dated some bits of birch bark on the hilts of the swords, and that pointed to a date between 1600 and 1560 BC. They also used a technique called X-ray fluorescence to analyze trace elements within the copper alloy, and this allowed them to pinpoint the origin of that copper to a mine near Bischofshofen, Austria, which would have been out of commission by the Iron Age. And that refuted another set of claims which asserted that the disc was not actually in its original context, either because it had been moved by the looters or maybe sometime in antiquity, and was not actually Bronze Age like those swords, but was instead Iron Age. If that mine was out of commission by the Iron Age, the disc had to have been earlier. And amazingly, analysis of the isotopes within the tin and a similar analysis of the gold both pointed to mines in Cornwall, England, speaking to how international the trade was in precious metals even more than 3,000 years ago. And believe it or not, especially tin, which we now make cans out of, was a particularly valuable commodity back in those days, because tin is a critical component of bronze along with copper. Now, copper is relatively abundant, but tin back then was only known to come from a handful of mines spread across Cornwall, Iberia, Greece, and Anatolia. Okay, so that's the whodunit. Now, let's get to the what. What is this disc? What does it show us? As usual with archaeoastronomy, it's not totally clear and there isn't 100% agreement, but I think there's enough of a consensus on some points that we can actually say some stuff. So obviously, this here is the sun and this is the moon. Now this little arc down here is believed to represent the solar boat, which some ancient mythology believed pulled the sun across the sky, although there are other hypotheses like even the aurora borealis. Now this group of 7 stars here is believed to be Pleiades, which is a very prominent cluster of stars to the naked eye because they're one of the closest to Earth. It's pretty clear that there was another gold arc over here on the left to mirror the one on the right, but what could these 2 arcs represent? Now here's the really cool part. If you draw crisscrossing lines from one end to the other of each, that creates approximately 82-degree angles. And during the winter and summer solstices at the approximate latitude of the find site, 51 degrees north, 82 degrees was the angle between the position of the sunrise and sunset in the sky. Absolutely amazing. And finally, there are 32 stars in total, which may represent the equivalence in terms of number of days between the solar and lunar years. 32 solar years, each of which has 365 days, approximately equals 33 lunar years, each of which has 354 days. And 32 stars plus the sun or the moon equals 33, which proves that I can do math.
I can handle things, I'm smart!
Anyway, that last one is a bit more speculative, but overall it seems like pretty solid stuff, right? However, the exact practical use of the disc remains unclear. You see, we know these were agrarian societies, so knowing the progress of the year through celestial events was very important for planting and harvesting, because it's like they didn't exactly have calendars. However, investing to make this a portable object was kind of strange, because if you remember, those 82-degree angles only function at a certain latitude, which is where the find site was. So if you move it any distance from that, the whole thing isn't going to work. However, I think really there's enough there in order to feel confident that we're at least on the right track. All right, so there you have it. The oldest accurate depiction of celestial phenomenon ever found by some looters. If this twisted tale shows us just one thing, and broken record alert, that is the importance of archaeological context. You see, because the original context was lost and the find site was not able to be investigated until 3 years after the original dig, that raised a bunch of questions and doubts, some very justified, others frivolous. And that whole mess could have been avoided if we had just had the original context from the beginning. Alright, well that's another episode of Archaeology Porn, a truly heavenly spectacle. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.